I always thought the mainstream media had bias. I always thought they had massive
Yeah.
bias. I'm a kid that read 3 newspapers. When did it become blatant? When did it become overt that this was this side? And in the mainstream media, not bloggers, things like that. Mainstream.
Yeah, so I'm writing on this right now, and I think there's several different threads that all came together with Trump. First of all, I do believe that sort of so many left-wing journalists bought into the idea that Trump was Satan and that he was a stooge of Russia and that Russia collusion happened and that he was a Manchurian candidate and that he was uniquely evil. So, one, I think Orange Man bad definitely infected and infiltrated so many different newsrooms out there. Second part of this, and I don't think it's been discussed as much, is all of these companies were moving from a general interest business model. That is, Dan, what you're talking about. Hey, I'm going to go buy the newspaper on the street. I'm a general interest subscriber, but I'm not a rabid partisan, right? Like I went to school in Washington, D.C. Washington Post is a fabulous newspaper that at the time was left leaning. But remember, they covered the Clinton impeachment like crazy, was left leaning, but also trying to cover all of Washington, D.C. for everyone. Same thing I think was true of the New York Times back in the day. And I think what happened is when they went direct subscription based all over the nation, right? So if you subscribe, and I do, to the Washington Post and to the New York Times, because I try to read everything every day. I had to get ready for my radio show. If you subscribe, in fact, I'm still old school, and I've got sitting next to me right here, this is today's Wall Street Journal. And then I also have today's, I still get the print newspaper. Here's my New York Times. I read these cover to cover every morning before I do my radio show, both of them, as well as the Washington Post on digital. And the reason why I bring that up is I think that the subscriber base of these newspapers was very anti-Trump. And when you move from a general interest newspaper predicated on selling ads, Dan, you want to sell ads to everybody. So you want, if you're selling a Mercedes ad, you want the biggest possible audience to see your ad. To when you go to direct subscription, you're almost in the model of just covering one team, right? So if you think about like Rivals or 24/7 or On 3, those subscription models are, hey, you really care desperately about your team. And the coverage of your team can't in general be that negative. So I think you had economic imperatives suddenly in a subscription model where if the New York Times, what did they say at the top? All the news that's fit to print. If they truly put all the news that's fit to print in a non-biased fashion, their business model would get attacked because their subscribers wanted to read Orange Man bad. They wanted to believe that Trump was the worst human who had ever existed. So I think the economic imperative of subscription-based models combined with Trump's rise created, look, a lot more people subscribed to the New York Times. It was good for business, but it created an imperative where they could no longer cover the news honestly because their audience got mad if they said anything other than Trump is the worst human ever. It's not a coincidence that out of nowhere, the Washington Post suddenly puts on its headboard, democracy dies in darkness. Really? Because I would argue democracy dies when big tech and Democrats collude and decide what stories people can see. And I think we're getting the blowback reaction here in 2022 to those coverages. And I would say also they've destroyed their legitimacy. You talked about the personal foibles issue. I think a lot of Republicans just don't care because they know that this is a behind the curtain move to try to destroy their ability to win a race. It's not about actually being honest. And so I think these newspapers to a large extent became partisan rags. That doesn't mean, by the way, that they can't be entertaining or engaging or smart. It just means that you have to presume every article that you're reading is biased to a substantial degree.
So they gave in, they gave in to stuff they said they would not be about.
They followed the money, right? Like many businesses do. And the business imperative is different in the 2020s than it was in the 1990s. And I think as a result, the overall journalism is weakened.